Our WED Talk is about to begin. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to WED Talks. I would like to welcome a special guest from Philadelphia Works, Executive Director Pat Clancy.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. 2 weeks to baseball season. Woohoo! But for all you Eagle fans out there, Barkley, Barkley. But anyway, so that is a segue into what you will hear today, which is, how do we deal with effective teams, right? What is the structure that you need? How do you begin to build them? And more importantly, how do you measure their outcomes? We are excited today to have Dr. David Burkus join us. But on behalf of my colleagues in the Southeast region of Pennsylvania, the Workforce Board, we hope that this TED Talk gives you an opportunity to listen to experts as we each and every day try to find out and figure out how to get more people back to work. It really is imperative that we build either our own teams, but more importantly, our regional team. Like, how do we work better together? So we're excited to have this amazing speaker today. I am thrilled because I think I'm going to learn something new, as I often do. But more importantly, I would like to hand it off to probably one of the smartest ladies in the Southeast region, if not the state of Pennsylvania, Billy Barnes. Billy, I hope you have a great day. We are live, so I will make sure that, all my comments are really good about you. But it's not easy to do because you are quite the amazing lady, and really appreciate you taking the lead on bringing together these amazing speakers.
Thanks for that amazing introduction, Pat Clancy. Every leader wants to build a high-performing team, and nearly everyone wants to be on one. However, most teams fail to perform at their optimal level. We try to recruit star players, improve compensation, give copious feedback, and obsess over engagement surveys. But in the end, we still don't have the results we want, and we often feel we're out of options. But the secret to unlocking performance isn't recruiting new teammates or designing the perfect incentive. The most effective teams became that way by building the habits and culture of the team that allows for optimal performance. But where do we begin? Today's WED Talk expert is here to explain how. David Burkus is one of the world's leading business thinkers. His forward-thinking ideas and best-selling books are changing how companies approach leadership, teamwork, and collaboration. David's insights have been featured in the New York Times, CNN, the BBC, and NPR, just to name a few. David now works with leaders from organizations across all industries, including PepsiCo, Fidelity, Adobe, and NASA. Please help me welcome David Burkus. David?
Oh, thank you so much for that intro. Thanks for having me. I am really excited to be here. I'm coming at you from Tulsa, Oklahoma, right smack dab in the middle of the country. But as soon as y'all reached out, sorry, I've been Southerner over the last 20 years. I was super excited because fact that's not in that bio you just heard, I was born Holy Redeemer Hospital, Meadowbrook, PA, right? So I'm a Montgomery County baby. Grew up in Downingtown, so Chester County, so right nearby. Still an Eagles fan. Still have my replica ring from 2016, greatest day of my life. My wife and children were asleep because they didn't care anywhere near as much as I did. That's a whole other thing. As you heard, I'm an organizational psychologist by training. I study teams and team culture, and I study what makes some teams more innovative, more higher performing than others, what makes some teams more resilient than others, and what makes some teams more engaging than others. We've all been in those scenarios where we're on a team where ideas are buzzing and we have energy every time we jump on the Teams or the Zoom call or even meet in person. We know what it's like to be on those teams. And we know what it's like to be on teams where everything just sort of falls apart, where it's frustrating, where the meetings drag on forever, and you just don't look forward to collaborating with these people at all. We know what it's like to be the 2017 team full of backups that managed to go all the way and put Tom Brady on his butt and end up winning the Super Bowl, and then look at an even more talented team like this year. Sorry, we're going to go there. Start the year beginning to think this is our year, we're going to win the Super Bowl, and then watch everything fall apart. I was actually in Kansas City for like the last great game when we played the Chiefs, and then everything fell apart. And if you noticed, they did a great job being quiet. But I, as an organizational psychologist, started studying what I knew to be the thing that kind of explained it. It was a culture problem. It was a clash between different personalities and different coordinators. And that's the same thing that happens at work. When you look deep at the research on high-performing teams, what you find is that while talent is useful, right? Talent doesn't make the actual team. All things being equal, you would want a team of the highest talent, the highest level of knowledge, skills, and abilities you can get, but all things are not equal. And the thing that really unequalizes them is how well that team clicks together, how well that team develops a positive team culture. You know, this ties directly into workforce and economic development, because the big problem I'm brought in to solve with a lot of organizations I work with is attracting, retaining, and keeping talent engaged. And the stat I love to throw out is that employees who report being on positive team cultures are 2.3 times more likely to be engaged. That's not, you know, just a little bit. That's not 23%. That's 230% more likely, right? So a massive shift just by the team that they're on, not the organization, not the whole company culture or nonprofit culture, not the whole organization, but the specific team that they're on or the teams that they're working most closely with have, by some reports, explain up to 70% of the variance in engagement, in turnover, in retention, and in performance. And so that's what I study and that's what I dive into. And in the time that we have together, I want to just give you kind of a survey of what 40 years of amazing research on that positive team culture, that high-performing team culture suggests, explains it all. Because when you look at the data, and as I said, we've been studying positive team cultures for about 40 years now. When you look at the data, you see three trends that are present in every high-performing team culture. Three universal truths, three elements of a high-performing team culture, if you will. And here they are. And by the way, if you can't see this chart, if you can't see my slides entirely, what you may need to do is click view. It's usually in the top right corner. Sometimes it's in the bottom. It's right next to react in the chat function. You may need to click view and switch over into speaker mode instead of gallery view. If you're only seeing me, then you're probably in the right mode. But here's what we have. High-performing teams all have three things in common. Their culture is marked by common understanding, psychological safety, and a sense of pro-social purpose. Common understanding, psychological safety, and a sense of pro-social purpose. So what I want to do in the time that we have together is dive into each of those elements, talk about the research behind why they're so important, give you an example of what that element looks like in practice on high-performing teams, and then most importantly, give you some practical things you can do no matter what level you are. We're all leaders. The just question is how many levels in the organization you are. Give you some practical things you can do to start building that element in your own teams and your own team culture. If that sounds like a plan, let's warm up our fingers. If that sounds like a plan, I won't make you type the whole word yes, but just give me that letter Y in the chat to let me know you're in it and you're with us and you're ready to dive into these three elements. If that sounds like a good plan to you. Perfect. Perfect, perfect, perfect. All right, so let's dive in. So what is common understanding, this first element? Common understanding happens when team members have a commonly held perspective on the team's expertise, the team's assigned tasks, but also their context and work preferences. So what I mean here is probably two things, right? So when the team has a shared understanding of what's expected of them and what they can expect of other people, but also a shared understanding of the team that, excuse me, I'm fighting off a sneeze this morning, but also a shared understanding of the people on their team. So it's a mix of role clarity. It's a mix of making sure that the job descriptions match up with what their expectations are and making sure that everybody knows what's expected of them and can trust the team. But it's also this context and preferences piece, which I often call empathy, right? It's this kind of mix between clarity and empathy. And the second part, believe it or not, in this new modern world of work, we tend to, especially if you have any background in sort of HR and recruitment, et cetera, we tend to overemphasize on the clarity piece and not really dive into the empathy piece, but it's the empathy piece that really drives performance. And here's what I mean. In the world we live in now, like I'm looking at it, all the people who have their cameras on for this, which by the way, I appreciate because that'll help me see whether or not you laugh at my terrible jokes. All the people who have their cameras on, I see a mix of workplaces, right? You have some people I see you coming from a home office. Some people I see the unmistakable fluorescent lights of an office building, right? And then some of you I see hiding where you're at, pretending to be on a tropical beach somewhere, or in an office that's way cleaner than our own because it's a fake photo, right? We're all working in a variety of different contexts. And if you think about it, your expectation of people's responsiveness, people's attentiveness or ability to speak up in a Teams or a Zoom meeting, that actually depends a lot on the context, right? Think about in the early days of the pandemic when work from home became the reality for huge swaths of the workforce. We were all working in these little different contexts. And like, I'll give you an example. I'm lucky enough today, I'm coming at you from about a 10-foot by 10-foot room in the basement of my house. Both of my kids got picked up by the school bus just before this. I have a hardwired internet connection and a big fancy camera, what have you. Other people, their work from home isn't as much, right? Their work from home, especially when the pandemic started, was like, I bought a folding screen at Home Depot and I stretched it across the corner near my dining room table, and I've been hiding there from my family, my spouse, my children, or my roommates ever since, right? Two very different contexts, even though we both would count both as home, right? And now we have, in this kind of return to office mode, we have people who are working in a variety of different contexts, and we need to know what that context is. But that's just context. Let's talk about preferences for a second, right? Let's talk about empathy for people's workplace preferences. We have all of these different tools for collaboration, and we use them all very differently, don't we? Like a simple, easy one, like really easy one we all use, one that I use to coordinate being with you today, email. We all have an email address for wherever we work, and we all use this tool differently. As soon as you got your first sort of work email address, you realize, man, everybody uses this tool differently, don't they? Right? Some people are email novelists. They're the ones, they write the long emails, the multiple paragraph emails, 1,000 words, 1,500 words, 2,000 words. These are the people that wrote, that took English and the 5-paragraph essay in 10th grade that we all learned, thesis statement, supporting point 1, supporting point 2. These are those people. And that's every email they write to you. And my favorite is at the bottom, they'll write like thoughts, ? At the bottom of their novel, right? And your first thought, if you're like me, is, okay, my first thought is your email is way too long and I'm probably not going to read it. And thankfully now in the world we live in, I can like copy and paste it into ChatGPT and get a summary of it, right? But my thought is it's too long. Why? I'm not a novelist. I'm an email poet, if you will. I write emails in haiku, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, right? A lot of emails, my signature line that auto-populates is longer than the email I wrote, right? And if you're trying to collaborate, a novelist and a poet trying to collaborate without that sense of empathy that we've been talking about, what you end up with is people getting frustrated because either they feel like this person's doing not enough work or that this person's too verbose and they're keeping me from focusing on the real work. But the truth is, it's just how we think and how we prefer to communicate. The novelists tend to use writing as a form of thinking through what their stance on an issue, making an argument for their proposed solution. Whereas the poets like myself, we would rather jump on the phone or on Zoom for 5 or 10 minutes and hash it all out there. It's just a difference in preference. And when you start to understand that preference, you start to understand how better to collaborate with people. And that's why role clarity matters, but this other element, empathy, matters just as much. I think the other reason it matters is, we're talking about the workforce today, and we're talking about all of the effects and this huge trend of embracing, but also recognizing the need for a little more empathy around mental health, a little more empathy around stress, a little more empathy around what people are going through, rather than just constantly expecting them to maintain a high level of performance no matter what's going on in the world. Global pandemics and also a lot of social unrest and division have a way of making us recognize, hey, what's actually important and what do we need to focus on? And what you find is that the leaders that can actually embrace that don't just hold their teams accountable to clarity, but also do so through a sense of empathy, tend to get the highest levels of performance out of their team. I'll give you an example, and I've already probably, if you're like the 5% of this call that may not be an Eagles fan, I don't know why you're here. And by the way, Sherry, I did see you change your virtual background to Eagles at one point. That was awesome. I'll give you an example from a different sports team. One of my actual picks for amazing leader, one of the greatest, in my opinion, collegiate head coaches of a team of all time. You're welcome to guess in the chat who I'm probably referring to. I'll give you a small hint. This person was the coach at UCLA for over 20 years and won multiple national titles, double-digit national titles, right? Most people when they get into that chat, tend to guess John Wooden, but other side of the campus in UCLA, in my opinion, the greatest collegiate head coach of all time is this woman, Valerie Condos Field. It's okay if you've never heard of her. She doesn't usually go by Coach Field or Coach Condos Field. She goes by Miss Val. And she was the coach of the UCLA women's gymnastics team for over 20 years. And in that time, won multiple national titles, won the Pac-12, back when there was a Pac-12, 19 times. I think my favorite stat of her entire career, she was voted Pac-12 Coach of the Century at one point. And the interesting thing about all of this is that Miss Val is not a gymnast. Right, she spent decades coaching at the highest level of collegiate gymnastics, but couldn't do a cartwheel to save her life, couldn't teach you to do a cartwheel to save her life. She's a dancer. In fact, the reason she was referred to as Miss Val for so long is that she was trained in ballet. And in ballet, you often refer to your instructors as Miss or Mrs., et cetera, or Mr. You use that title instead of coach. And so that's what she sort of organically brought in. She had no intention of being a head coach, mind you, but I think there's a whole other WEDTalk we could do on the nature of leadership there. The idea that it's often the people who don't see themselves in that role that end up making the best leaders instead of the people that are hungry for power. And the thing I think is amazing about Miss Val is that she became a member of the coaching staff at UCLA as a choreographer because she was a dancer. She was brought in to help the athletes choreograph their routines. At the time, this was 30-something years ago, you had gymnastics routines on floor accompanied by music, but it was usually one instrument. So often it'd be piano or something like that. Now they use pre-recorded musical tracks. But if you think about it, I kind of think we should get back to that live musical accompaniment thing, right? Like we're headed into an Olympic year. Imagine watching on like floor routine, like coming up next, Simone Biles, accompanied by Beyonce, right? I think that'd be amazing. I think we could really juice the ratings on the Olympics if we went back to that. But that's a whole other thing. So she came in as a choreographer, and when the existing head coach surprised everybody by resigning, the athletic director asked her if she wanted to do it. And she said she would do it for a year so that they had time to run a proper search and find a real coach. And then she said about trying to figure out what a high level head coach of a massive and elite gymnastics team should look like. And so she copied what a lot of existing coaches were doing. And at the time, probably the most successful coach in gymnastics was a man named Bella Caroli, the Caroli Ranch in Texas, if you've ever heard of it. If you've heard of it, you might know where parts of this story are going. And she sought to mimic the Caroli style. Now, the Caroli style was brutal. The Caroli style had this mentality that winning was about running a factory that constantly refined athletes until they were their highest level of performance. And as long as you're never out of a supply of incoming athletes, you're always going to be able to put out elite level athletes. It's a churn. And so athletes were told, when to wake up, what to eat, how to wear their hair, how to address their coaches, every little detail, strong emphasis on clarity, and a lot of burnout as a result. And a lot of girls who just decide this is not it, I don't want this at this cost, and would burn out. And no one ever held Bella Caroli accountable because his athletes that made it through that factory still won. But as you know, that might work for getting Olympic medal, but that's a pretty terrible way to run an organization, right? Having those levels of turnover, et cetera, are pretty unsustainable for most organizations. And it didn't work for Miss Val either when she sought to copy it. She became too brutal, she became too uncaring, and her athletes started to burn out far too often. They qualified on the strength of their talent for the national championship that year, but she came in exactly last place among the teams that qualified. And the following year, because they hadn't found an existing head coach, she got another year. The following year, they did so poorly in the regular season, they didn't even qualify to earn a title. And it was after they didn't qualify that the team staged an intervention and basically said, What happened to you? We miss Miss Val. We miss the old you, the one that was a little more empathetic and caring. And so she decided, wow, I made a massive mistake here. I need a course correct. I need to understand these people. I need to build what she would call champions for life, right? And so she sought about being that more empathetic self, getting to know her athletes much more often. She said an interesting rule that I think is great for this clarity and empathy dichotomy that we're talking about here. She would talk about their performance and give them performance-related feedback if they were in the gym, but anywhere else she saw them, we don't talk about work. We talk about how's your schools going? How's your family? What hobbies are you into? I want to get to know you as a person so I know how I can support the whole you, not just you, the athlete. And it worked. It started to grow not only more empathy between her and the rest of the team, but it started to help the teammates know each other a lot better and know how to support each other a lot better. So the team started winning. The interesting thing I think she found is that when you understand a lot about a person, when you understand all the multifacets of a person, you understand how to give them work-related feedback better as well. When you have that level of empathy, you actually get better at the clarity piece as well, because you understand how to speak their language and give them better performance feedback. And they feel far more engaged to improve because they feel that connection. So the team started winning. They won their first national championship within a few years, and 9 more would follow. But it wasn't always easy. Sometimes going to that level of empathy involved learning things about your team that you may not see as your job, you may not want to have dealt with, but now in this new world of work, you kind of are responsible for learning. So, for example, probably the biggest test of Miss Val's career happened later in her career when an athlete named Kyla Ross walked into her office one day. Now, remember the split. If we're in the gym, we talk about work, we talk about performance. If we're out of the gym, we talk about other things. And so Kyla was more of an introverted person who talked much more often in the gym than outside of it. But she'd built a level of trust at this point that Kyla came into her office and started talking about all sorts of things. And you ever talk with somebody and it just keeps going on forever and ever? It's just like the long range conversation covering lots of different topics. And you know, that's not the real reason they're here. Like, they're here to talk about something else. We just haven't gotten to it yet. I just need to hold enough space for them to get to it. It's exactly what was going on this day in Miss Val's office. Kyla was warming up to sort of the big reveal. And after 25 minutes of talking about a variety of different topics, Kyla revealed to Miss Val that when she was training for the Olympics at the Caroli Ranch, she had been sexually abused by Larry Nassar. Kyla Ross was the first person to go public in what we would later learn would be hundreds of victims at the hand of that monster. And it started with Kyla, and it started in Miss Val's office. Now, if you're leading that high-performing team of UCLA women's gymnastics, you've got a dilemma on your hands now, right? Because your job ultimately is to win. Your job is to produce results. And yet now you have an athlete who's revealed to you a level of trauma that they've been struggling with that is affecting their performance, sure, and that you need to deal with. But the process of dealing with it might in the short term lower their performance. How do you do that? The first thing Miss Val did was obviously show Kyla, we're going to support you. We care about you. We're going to work through this. Do you want to go public with this? What do you want to do? The first thing they did was have a team-wide meeting. And in that team-wide meeting, they found out Kyla wasn't the only person on the team who had been through the same trauma. And so now as a team, they decide we're going to talk about this and we're going to go public. The team was one of the first big people to go public on this whole story, which provides sort of a massive distraction for sure. But the amazing thing that happened is that it didn't distract the team from winning. In fact, as the team learned how to support each other, how to grow in empathy, they started performing at a level that exceeded past performance. In the same year that the media circus around this was going on and all of these athletes are being chased down by journalists and people trying to capture their stories and having to deal with their own personal trauma, et cetera, in that same year, UCLA won the national championship as a team. Kyla Ross won 2 individual national titles that year on floor and on vault. And in fact, when I spoke with Miss Val, when I interviewed her for my book, she told me that right after her floor performance, Kyla ran over to Miss Val, jumped into her arms, and said, "We're going to win this one." Now, the score hadn't been posted yet. Kyla just knew. And Miss Val asked, how do you know? And Kyla said, "I've felt myself walking taller every day since I left your office." Now, listen, I hope you never have to deal with in your career I hope you never have to deal with that level of trauma on someone on your team. I hope you never have to deal with that level of empathy getting to the point where people reveal to you that much. I hope people on your team have never suffered through that much trauma, although sadly, I know those people are out there. What I do know, right, is that every single person on this call wants to be the type of leader or teammate that people would report, you know what, when I work with you, I feel myself walking taller. And that's why I think that empathy piece, that's why that empathy piece works so well. Sherry, I see your note about chat not working. Thank you. I was in the moment here on this talk. I do see that. I kind of figured that when nobody told me yes, we're ready to go, but we'll roll with it. So we will have some time for Q&A at 9:45. What I would ask you is, if you've got a question, if you've got anything, et cetera, I'll just run through this and maybe I'll try and get us a little bit more chat time. If you've got a question, write it down so you don't forget, since I can't see it, and then we'll do a raise hand off mic thing so we can get that working.
Hi, David. I'm sorry, this is Andrea. Just like
Yeah.
to address the question about the chat. It is possible that some organizations disable chat, so that's an administrative setting on their end.
Okay.
But we will remedy that by addressing questions through discussion, because you will have the ability to turn your mic on.
Yep. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. Appreciate it. So let's talk about this mix of clarity and empathy and how you can start building this on your own team to build that positive team culture. And the first recommendation is a pure clarity play, and that's what I call hold huddles. Now, this is getting the team together on a regular basis to talk about the action we're about to commit. Not to use another football analogy, huddles is great. Huddles are the syncing up of action, the plan before the play itself. And on a lot of teams that I work on, what I find is that they get together on a regular basis. And in particular, the highest performing teams make sure they're not just reporting out to each other and not just saying, here's my calendar, but they're answering 3 specific questions whenever they sync up. In a work context, in a knowledge work context, often this is a weekly meeting. And the purpose here is not to just hear everything from a manager. The purpose is for the team to report out on 3 specific questions. What did I just complete? What am I focused on next? And what's blocking my progress? The first 2 questions they're just a great status report. They're a great way to know that everybody on your team is doing what they say they're going to do. They're a great way to hold people accountable without coming off as a micromanager, right? Because you're just asking them to report out to the whole team. What did I just complete? Question 1, what am I focused on next? But it's that third question, I really think it's the empathy question. And I really think is the most valuable one for teams, which is, as I'm looking out to what I'm supposed to be working on for this week or this day, here's what I could see potentially derailing my work. Here's where I need help, right? It's an easy way to get the team to say ahead of time, before they run into the derailer, here's where I need help. And the truth is, we all need help, right? We work on teams so often because, look, the easy problems of life and of work have been solved. The problems we face now are usually ones that require collaboration because they're a little bit more complex. But we also have a really hard time asking for help a lot of times. And so a question like, what's blocking my progress, allows us as a team to do that. Number 2, and this is a pure empathy play, is what I call find free time. Especially before the pandemic, we were probably better at this, but it's amazing to me when I study high performing teams, how often you see them do what looks like wasted time. How often they socialize and hang out together, how often they linger in a conference room or linger after a meeting and talk about stuff unrelated to work. And as I started to dive into that, what I found is that unstructured time, that seemingly unproductive time, is usually some of the highest performing time because of the connections it builds. What we know from psychology literature is in those times where we have these unstructured conversations, right? We build what are called uncommon commonalities. Things that 1 or 2 people on the team or 3 people on the team have in common with each other that are uncommon to the rest of the team. And uncommon commonalities might not seem like much, but those are the beginnings of what become deep bonds and friendships on a team. And one of the number 1 questions that can predict whether or not an employee is engaged and performing at a high level is how well they answer in the affirmative, I have a good friend at work. Right? Work friends really do make us far more productive, not only because we have that level of potential emotional support when things are stressful, a la the UCLA story, but also because work friends help us tap into kind of the informal information networks of an organization and let us solve problems a little bit faster than we might be able to based on our title or our position, et cetera. And all of that just stems from hanging out time. Now, what I don't mean here is sort of the Zoom happy hours we all did in 2020 in the early days of the pandemic, where we invited people to these long unstructured calls and it just got really boring and really awkward fast. But what it can be is, 5 minutes at the beginning of a meeting to just catch up on what everybody's doing. Or once a quarter, having those sort of in-person time, unstructured time, right? It may seem like it's not worth investing in, but the truth is I've yet to find a high-performing team that doesn't deliberately work to build some of those uncommon commonalities through that free time. And the last, and I think a great way to kind of really get at the empathy around work preferences, is an exercise I like to call Manual of Me. And this is exactly what it sounds. This is writing out a user's manual to what it's like to work with you. When I work with teams, we use this user's manual around 4 questions that really help build empathy around each other's work preferences. Those 4 questions are fill in the blank questions. I'm at my best when blank. I'm at my worst when blank. You can count on me to blank. And what I need from the team is blank. So I'm at my worst when, I'm at my best when, I'm at my worst when. You can count on me to, and what I need from the team. In other words, here are my strengths, here are my weaknesses, here's the ways I most often help the teams that I'm on, and here's the help I need from the team. Now, often those things are related, but sometimes they're not. And the idea here, and you can add whatever details you want. I work with some teams and we build manuals of me that include all sorts of personal information and pictures of family and what have you. That's fine. To the level people are comfortable disclosing, that's fine too. But the core 4 questions, what they get at, are a deep understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses, a deep understanding of each other's preferences, in such a way that we know how to better collaborate with people afterwards. So what I'll usually do is I'll circulate those 4 questions ahead of time. I have a whole kind of PDF that I use where people can fill in the blanks. Then we'll come into a meeting where we'll report those answers out. And then we'll take all of those PDFs and we'll put them somewhere where everybody can access them, right? So they're really easy. I have often found not only for understanding now, right? They're a great team building activity similar to whether you take a DISC or a Myers-Briggs or something like that and have a discussion about differences. This just doesn't involve a licensing fee. It's totally free. They're a great way to force that discussion around those difference in preferences, but they also become a great reference document after the fact. So if I'm like, man, Jenny was super weird on, no offense, Jenny, I just see you laughing at some of my jokes, so I look back at your face on the screen often. Jenny was super weird today on that call. Why is that? And then I realized that she actually said, I'm at my best when I'm working from home and undistracted. And oh, she happened to be in the office today. I bet you there was a bunch of people like knocking on her door, asking her all sorts of questions. And that's why she seemed, oh, great, right? I start to understand more about people's behavior related to that manual of me. And now I know what to expect from them and how best to communicate with them. And it all starts with that simple little document, 4 questions. I'm at my best when, I'm at my worst when, you can count on me to, and what I need from you or what I need from the team is. And that builds that sense of empathy that really helps teams perform even on the clarity side. Now, the second element we see in high-performing teams is a sense of psychological safety. And this is a term that a lot of us are probably familiar with. This is a term that has entered the chat, if you will, in a variety of different contexts, because we see it as crucially important for things like innovation, because we want to tap into more and more creative ideas. But we also see it in areas like diversity, equity, and inclusion. We want people to feel included and feel like they can bring their whole selves to work. Well, if they don't feel safe enough to do that, then they're not going to do it. And when I say safe here, I want to emphasize psychological safety's definition is that team members feel safe to express themselves and take risks, take interpersonal risks. So when I mean safety here, I don't mean that you're never going to hear anything you ever disagree with. What I mean is that you are going to feel safe enough on the team to state the things you disagree with, to share your unique perspectives, your lived experiences, et cetera. And even if those are in conflict, to know that's not going to be held against you from the rest of the team. Now, a misconception here around psychological safety as well is that it equates to just trust, right? That if teams feel, if they trust each other, they'll feel psychologically safe. But what we know from the research is there's actually a mix of trust and respect. I have to trust the team enough to share that crazy idea or share that place that I'm failing in and need help with, or express some unique element of myself and my lived experience. But if I don't feel respected after that moment, I take the risk because I trust them. If I don't feel respected after the risk, I don't trust you anymore, right? If I speak up to share that idea and I immediately get told, we don't have the budget for that, or that'll never work, we tried something similar, guess what happens to my level of trust, right? It goes down. So it's this pairing of trust and respect. And really it's that respect piece that's hardest. it reminds me of when this gentleman, Alan Mulally, attempted to turn around Ford Motor Company. Really succeeded in turning. I don't know why I said attempted there. Succeeded in turning around Ford Motor Company in 2006. Now, Alan was the previous CEO of Boeing Commercial Airlines during a turnaround invoked by 9/11, and I bet you that Boeing would want him back right now. Actually, I bet you Ford would want him back right now as well. But Alan was committed to this idea of building a team at the senior leadership level that actually had so much psychological safety that we could confront the real problems. See, at the time, if you've ever worked in Detroit or you ever worked with any of the big automotive companies, that's a really intra-competitive culture. At the time, it was, I like to say it's toxic. Alan, I've spent hours with Alan, and he re-edited the book after I started writing it, and he crossed out every time I used the word toxic because he felt like that wasn't being nice, because he's that nice of a person. But I'll be honest with you, it was a very toxic culture. The type of culture where people feel like if I admit a failure, if I share that kind of crazy idea, if I show a kink in my armor, someone's going to stab me in it, right? So I have to be on guard all the time. I have to be protected all the time, and I have to be looking for opportunities to put someone else down in order to climb over them, and maybe I'll get ahead. The people in his room, the 12.5 people in that senior leadership team, most of them sought their competition as other people in that room, in other words, competition for promotion, than they did the other automakers. And that's why Ford was failing miserably, right? Have you ever been on a team like that? Yeah, you didn't really get your best work out of that team, did it? And that's why when Alan took over, Ford's share price was about $1. Now, when he left, it would about 10 years later, it would be trading at $17. And what was the difference? Well, he was committed to building that sense of psychological safety on the team that would let people share their real problems. He had rules like that we were going to come together and we were going to talk openly about what are we working on and what do we complete and where do we need help. That sounds like a huddle. Guess where I learned it, right? He had other rules, like when we're meeting together, in order to build that respect that goes along with trust, we don't make jokes at other people's expense, for example. Never. He actually had someone have to resign from the senior leadership team because they couldn't stop making jokes and being snarky at other people's expense, right? But if you think about it, like that joke might be funny to everyone else in the room, but it's not funny to the person who you did it for, and now they don't trust you as much. And I get this, right? Like I'm Philly born and bred, right? Then I lived in Massachusetts for a time. Snark is my love language, right? I get this. I resonate with how hard this is. But in truth, if you want to build a team where people feel safe to actually say, here's what's going wrong, it's going to require some rules like that. And it's going to require some time. As Alan will tell you, it took 8 weeks for the first person on the senior leadership team to admit that they were having a problem. That executive was Mark Fields. Mark was in charge of the launch of the Ford Edge, and the Edge was having a production issue that was going to force them to have to delay the launch of it. And eventually you get to the point where you can't hide that failure anymore, so you have to bring it about. And of course, if you think about the culture I just described and the idea that here is Mark admitting that he's failing and leading this launch, think about what the reaction in the room was. It was that quiet, right? And it's not just because you're all on mute. It was that quiet because everyone was going, wow, Mark just resigned in front of all of us. Mark just blew up, right, in front of all of us. We're never going to see Mark again. But that's not what happened. Instead, Alan started clapping. Alan canceled the rest of the meeting and said, how can we help Mark? Mark, thank you for your visibility. Thank you for your transparency. And they started to work on fixing the problem. And the interesting thing is, as they fixed that problem, they fixed the other problem, which was people not trusting each other enough and not feeling respected when they brought failure. So they didn't talk about what was going wrong. This was a company that was going to lose $17 billion the first year Alan was there with the senior leadership team, and nobody was willing to admit any problems until 2 months in when one person finally did. But that one moment of interpersonal risk that was met with respect turned into a cascade where a lot more people started talking about what was going wrong. And over the course of a decade, they managed to do a massive course correct to the point where when Alan resigned 10 years later, he showed the board a $6.6 billion profit. So losing $17 billion to almost $7 billion profit. Share price, $1 a share to $17 a share. Constant labor relations contracts renegotiated to where everybody felt like they won, right? Needing to lay off workers and employees, totally avoided. And by the way, this time period includes the Great Recession and the other two automakers having to take bailouts, but Ford managing to actually have a few cuts, but minimize them as much as possible, not have to take any bailout money, and manage to turn around that ship and create something that worked for everybody. Why? Well, the key was building that sense of psychological safety. Now, I hope that you don't have to ever turn around a $17 billion loss and turn it into a profit. But I think all of us, and I can see it in your facial expressions on those of you that are on camera, I think all of us recognize, man, it would be great to work for a team where I feel like I really can openly talk about the ways I need help, where I really can share the uniqueness of myself, where I can share those crazy ideas. So here's a few ways to kind of get started building that sense of psychological safety. Number one is, if you're in a leadership role, signal vulnerability on your own. And what I mean when I say vulnerability here is not like, you don't have to get TMI, too much information, right? You don't have to go really deep right away in order to build. So you don't have to say like, this guy on a call told me I need to be vulnerable. So I want you to know, as a team, my parents never loved me. You don't have to, we're not talking about that, right? You don't have to like, hey, we need to be more vulnerable. So I want you to know I never had a date for junior prom, which is a true story, but is irrelevant to our conversation. So we'll move on. What I do mean is that when you're willing to share your own weaknesses, when you're willing to share your own mess ups, what you convey to the team is that you trust them, right? And that they can trust you back. So this might be saying, hey, the reason that my emails are so short is that I really question my own grammar and my ability to find typos. And so I'd rather talk in person with you, which is also a true story, despite my being a professional writer and speaker at this point, right? Because we start to have that conversation around, here's where I've messed up in the past. Here's what I've learned from experience, right? Experience is what we get when we don't get what we want. Here's what I've learned from that. People start to recognize they can trust you, and the team starts to trust each other. Number two, celebrate failures. And I don't mean handing out, trophies. We just had the Oscars. Right? I don't mean handing out trophies for colossal failures. Congrats, you cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars because of your mistake. We lost key clients, right? Our stakeholders are totally dissatisfied. Here's a trophy. I don't mean that. But what I mean is, think about what it would took for Mark Fields to get the courage to actually say, here's what's going wrong, I need help. Celebrate that transparency you see when people do it. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. Let's help it. Let's figure out how we can solve it, and let's learn from it. And you celebrate the fact that you had a learning moment because someone was willing to take that risk. And then the third is what I call model active listening, right? Meaning, look, it's really hard to help someone feel respected and heard when they're saying something you disagree with. I get it, right? Most of us, we're really good at thinking about our rebuttal as they're talking. But that doesn't help somebody else feel respected. And you don't have to accept their idea, but you do have to accept them as a person and help them feel heard as a person. And there's a couple ways you can make sure, there's a couple ways you can make sure you do that, right? We often talk about like, make sure you're making eye contact with them and giving nonverbals, et cetera. And those are all great. Candidly, those are really hard to do if you're talking virtually to them. Like, it's really hard to make eye contact on Teams. I'm actually staring at the camera most of the time. If I'm looking down here where you feel like I'm breaking eye contact, it's because I'm actually looking at y'all, right? So it's hard to do that sort of stuff. But what you can do is make sure that you're checking for understanding, that you're kind of creating this loop where when someone is speaking, you before you jump in with your rebuttal or your advice or what have you, you're asking them questions that are checking to make sure you heard them right and you understand them right, which not only gives you a chance to know that you heard them properly, but also lets them know, I really was listening, I really was in it, tell me more about this. And as a result, they feel heard. And then the conversation proceeds with a whole lot more psychological safety, right? If you do that along with your own vulnerabilities and celebrating failures, you'll build that sense of psychological safety. Real fast at the end, I want to touch on this element before we dive into questions. And it's a sense of pro-social purpose, this third fundamental element. This happens when team members feel they're making a contribution toward work that benefits others. If I could think of the easiest way to describe this, one of the big things we can do to drive engagement, to drive retention, to drive performance and motivation is to let people know their why for sure. And we're all familiar with this idea that people want to know why we do what we do. But the truth is, for most people, a compelling why is actually who, as in who is served by the work that we're doing. And when we look into the research, we also see when teams have a clear idea of this is who's served by the work we're doing, they end up exhibiting more teamwork behaviors, or because we're nerdy organizational psychologists, we actually call it organizational citizenship behaviors. But what we really mean is things that we do to help the team instead of help our own performance metrics, help our own objectives. And when teams have that strong sense of these are our stakeholders, even if it's internal to the organization, when teams have a strong sense of this is whose life or work is made better when I do a great job, they're much more likely to work together as well. Let me give you an example from one of my, sorry. So if we're looking at our triangle, this is a mix of both meaning, which is knowing that I'm making a contribution, and impact, meaning that I know whose work has benefited. And I'll give you a quick example from probably one of my favorite engagement raising efforts of all time. Has happened at the Big Four accounting firm KPMG, right? Apologies if anybody on the call is or was an accountant. Like, accounting is boring. Right, I'm just going to get out and say it. I taught business school, right? I know. I was a business school professor for a decade. And you might love numbers, you might love making it all work, but when you're auditing, which is what we do for most people who take their first job at a place like KPMG, you're grading other people's papers all day. You're sitting in a client office and you're checking all of their books, and they're worried because you might find a mistake, and then you ask them a question and they don't want to answer it because it might reveal that they made a mistake. That's a boring and thankless job. And so no surprise, engagement numbers at KPMG were pretty low in 2004 when they started their normal efforts. And they did the normal things we do, perks and pay increases, flexible work environment, all of that sort of stuff, but it didn't move the needle as much as they'd hope. And so they switched tactics and they started telling stories. They started talking about the impact that KPMG had had in the past as a means of figuring out our purpose. They even made like posters that would go along with these stories. So for example, they would talk about how KPMG's office in New York helped with the $8-9 billion recovery effort in New York after 9/11. Or they would talk about how in 1994 or 1992, why I'm blanking on which number, in the 1990s, it was KPMG's accountants in South Africa that audited and certified the election of Nelson Mandela. Right? Or at the beginning of World War II, the U.S. came into World War II through what's called the Lend-Lease Act, which President Roosevelt signed to lend and lease aid and equipment to the Allies so that they could better fight the war. Well, Roosevelt tapped KPMG, right? This is cool. You work for an organization that's had a moment of service at pivotal moments in world history. But while it's cool to know that, that's not exactly what you're doing, right? You're sitting in the office of some faceless company just checking other people's books. That's not. So it's what they did after telling all these stories that really made an impact. They launched what they called the 10,000 Stories Challenge. We told you a bunch of stories. Now you tell us the story of your job. You tell us how you're making an impact. To the 30,000 people in the firm worldwide, they basically said, you tell us, and we hope we can capture 10,000 individual answers. And the answers started coming in. They even made an app where people could make their own poster. And they got things like, I help farmers grow because I'm auditing this client. They're an agricultural banking client, and they are lending money out to farmers. And then farmers plant, reap, repay the money. That's what keeps family farms in business. And I help the bank stay in business. Therefore, I help farmers grow, right? Or I stop cybercrime because I'm working with credit unions and other places to prevent identity theft and to crack down on cybercrime and even money laundering efforts, et cetera. And I'm involved in that. They wanted 10,000 stories. Within 6 months, they got 42,000 stories, 42,000 individual answers to the question, who is served by the work that you specifically are doing? And what I think is amazing is that, yes, that raised engagement rates and performance rates, that raised retention rates. But when we look at the data, what they found is that it only did it in the teams that actually took the challenge seriously. Yeah, they got 42,000 stories, which means some people did the assignment twice, but actually some people never did the assignment. And those people had zero marker. And so the reason I emphasize this story is that it's not about senior leadership engaging in this amazing propaganda campaign to say why we're such a fantastic organization, which is often what we think drives that sense of purpose. It was actually individual teams taking a moment to reflecting individually on who is served by the work we're doing. Here's a couple ways you could do that. And then if you want to get your questions ready, we'll dive into that in about 1 minute. The first is make metrics meaningful. If you're running a team, if you are leading a team, if you're just serving on a team as an individual contributor, that team, odds are, has their performance judged based on certain metrics. We love metrics because metrics make it possible to manage. Makes perfect sense. The problem is metrics aren't meaning. We can't feel a number, right? So we often, not every time we share the number that we're tracking, but we should often take a point to talk about why we use this number and what it signifies, in particular, who it represents in terms of lives or colleagues whose work is made better by what we do. So make metrics meaningful. Number two, collect impact stories. When you get a story from a customer, stakeholder, someone who's served by the work your team does, internal or external, when you see a story about your organization in the media that's talking about the great work they do. If you have to forward it to yourself, but create a system where you can capture that. Because I rarely meet someone who disagrees with the idea that we should be talking about the impact our work has. What I often meet are people who go, yeah, but in the moment, I can't really think of exactly what to say. Don't. Just collect those stories on a regular basis. And when the moment's right, just go back to your collection and share that story. But it doesn't happen unless you start to collect them. And speaking of collecting them, this is the last tip, share gratitude on a regular basis. Why? Because when we share gratitude to other people in our organization or other people in the companies and organizations that we collaborate with, what we're really sending them is an impact story. What we're really saying is not just thank you so much for this, but here's how it made my work or my life better. Here's the impact it had on me. And so we're giving that person, right, a note about how their work is impacting them. And if we do that, like I recommend, if you're in a leadership role in an organization, do this on a regular basis and hope that people return the favor. And now we've got a whole organization that's sending impact stories to each other so that we can share that out with the team and let the team know that we do great work. If you do that, you'll find that you're building that sense of pro-social purpose. And along with the others, we've completed our model, right? We have these 3 elements of a fundamental, high-performing team culture. But you'll find that it's not just about these 3 elements. You'll find that they start to interact with each other, and that when you start to build on each element, it affects your team in ways you didn't expect. You'll find that when you build that sense of common understanding and pro-social purpose, you start to attract the best people to work with your organization. You start to recruit higher talented people because they want to work at a place where they feel understood by their coworkers and they know that their work matters. When you build that sense of common understanding and psychological safety, you start to get those same people's best ideas because they know how to speak to each other more effectively, how to collaborate with each other through common understanding more effectively, and they feel safe to bring their whole selves to work, to bring their true ideas and their true perspective to work. And when you build that sense of psychological safety and pro-social purpose, you get those same people's best effort. In fact, the reason you get their best effort is the reason I can summarize everything we've talked about in the triangle, in all of it. And by the way, if you didn't capture it in your notes quick enough, just shoot me an email. I'll send you the whole thing. I can summarize everything we've talked about today as we get ready to go to questions in one single sentence. That whole triangle and everything around in one single sentence. At the end of the day, this is the key to engaging positive team cultures. One sentence. People want to do work that matters. And they want to work with leaders who tell them they matter. Right? And if you want to give yourself some action items for the end of this talk, it's those 2 things. How can I let people know that our work matters? Even if I'm not a leader in title, but I'm just influential on my team. And how can I let the people on my team know that I believe they matter? And if we do those 2 things, we'll build all 3 of those elements. We'll build that high-performing team that not only gets the metrics done, that not only exceeds our expectations, but is an engaging and motivating place to work. We'll be one of those positive team cultures that makes people 2.3 times more likely to be engaged and stick around. So listen, thank you for letting me talk at you for a while. And since, again, we had kind of the chat situation, we'll just go ahead and get into questions, and feel free to unmute yourself. Do me a favor and also come on camera so I can see who's talking for questions. We got about 6 minutes for some questions to answer before we get to the top of the hour.
David, I have no questions, but I just had some little silly responses every time you were saying things. And I was muted by chat, so I'm just popping on to say great presentation. Thank you so much. And
thank you. And thank you for your note. You were the one holding up the sign for me, right?
Yes, I was.
I appreciate that.
By the way, I came from a family of CPAs and eventually weaned myself out of accounting, and I'm an HR manager, only without accounting for the last, I don't know how many years, too many to count.
It's funny. I'll be honest. I make a few enemies when I say that, but then when I talk about auditing, almost all of them are like, "Yeah, you're right. You're right." Accountants. I mean, I taught business school for 10 years, and the ones who are accounting and finance majors are the ones who probably have the most fulfilling, highest level careers. I have nothing against that, right? But man, we put them into some tough roles right in the beginning of their career.
Anyway, thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. Who else? What questions do you have for me?
Hi, David.
Hey.
I'm Lisa. Thank you so much. This was a great presentation. A little about me. I have a residential cleaning service and we are fully remote. And you mentioned about how do you make your team accountable. So do you have any suggestions on how to make your office staff accountable for the work that they're supposed to be bringing in and doing on a daily basis?
Yeah. Are you doing a regular huddle now?
We do, well, I should be in our team meeting right now, but I'm here. So, yeah, every Wednesday we have a level 10 meeting.
Okay. So often what I find is a lot of times in those meetings, it's not just, it's more for sending updates out to people and getting everybody on the same page and sort of a top-down variety instead of, are you giving them an opportunity to say, like, here's what I'm committing to between now and next Wednesday, here's what I'm focused on, here's what I completed, et cetera? Or is it more just making sure that information about the environment and about the business gets passed to them?
It's more the latter than the first.
Okay, no, so no problem. You've already got the rhythm of meeting on a regular basis. I would just do that. I would just ask them, hey, can we, so that we can collaborate better, can we kind of get a report on, here's my priorities between now and next Wednesday and what have you. And what that does, what I don't want for you, Lisa, is feeling like you have to micromanage every single person because you can't see them and they need to send you, like I worked with some managers early in the pandemic that asked their people to email them everything they did at the end of every day. And like, that is overkill. But if they show up to that Wednesday meeting knowing they have to talk about where they made progress on all of their different objectives and share that out with the team for the purposes of the team knowing how to support them, then they still feel a little tinge of accountability, but they don't feel like it's coming from you. They feel like it's coming from the broader team and how I can support them. So you might even just add the questions 2 and 3, right? What am I focused on for this week between now and next Wednesday? And where do I need help? And then just pay attention, because if they keep saying they're focused on the same things and never achieving them, then that's a pretty strong signal that they're not actually delivering.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's great information.
Perfect. And Billy, I think we got time for maybe one more question before we pass it back to you to let y'all know what's coming next. So one more question if we got time, or if we have them, or if you want like Sherry to just say amazing things about me, you can do that too.
Hey, David.
Yeah.
Hi, Carol Franklin here with my startup company, Gig Use. So first on the accounting piece, started my career at PwC.
Sorry. Okay. So my
yes.
condolences or congratulations or all of the above. I love it.
So everything you said resonated. And speaking of just work culture, my question would be, how do you bring maybe a pair alongside like all the tactics you shared, right? So you gave a lot of details within your own team, but let's say you have a fellow leader pair, right? And maybe their team structure isn't the healthiest, right? And then you have the spillover from folks from their teams who are coming to you. Like maybe how do we do either a network effect or try to bring other leaders along just with some of the tidbits you share?
Yeah. Let me answer this question in 2 formats, because I get your question because you're asking about a peer or maybe even a leader in the org chart underneath you. I often get the same question the other way. Hey, my team's great, but what do I do with senior leaders, et cetera, right? So the first thing on you and maybe a peer or somebody leading a team that's below you in the hierarchy, it's kind of the old psychology question. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? Well, only one, but the light bulb has to want to change, right? So it's kind of like that. You can't force it on them. What you can do is try and build some psychological safety between you and them, such that they maybe come to you with their struggles and their problems, and that creates the opportunity for it. You know, if you try and just tell at them, you need to be doing this, it's probably going to backfire. But if you can create a place where they can come to you with what they're facing, well, now they've also given you a chance to add on those things that they need. So that's peer or below. On a senior leadership level, you really can't, candidly. The best thing you can do is be sort of a human shield for your team and build a pocket of excellence on your team of a strong team culture. And then 2 things are going to happen as you do that in the long run. Number 1, those people are hopefully going to get promoted out and take that culture with them, so it spreads through the organization. And number 2, people are going to come calling and asking about why your team's getting the numbers they're getting. And then you've actually have an opportunity to speak up. So 2 different strategies based on where they are kind of in that org chart, but I hope that was helpful. And with that,
very helpful. Thank you.
Oh, awesome. And with that, I will turn it. We're right at the top of the hour back to Billy. Will tell us more about what's going on next month and what you've got planned for this whole year of WEDTalks. I love this system and love supporting it.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, David, for that wonderful presentation. And on behalf of the Bucks County and our regional workforce development partners, thanks to everyone for joining. We had a really good turnout this morning. Please save the date for the next WEDTalk on April 24th. Details will be available soon at www.buckscounty.gov/WEDTalks. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.